them side by side, just so you know. Those types of things. But for many of us, it was kind of our generation's moonshot thing. It was the next big thing. They launched something into space and the thing landed like a plane. How cool was that? But we were getting ready for that. And I was a junior in high school, 16 years old, and I had a teacher do the traditional assignment of high school, go interview somebody older and see what they think about this. Well, I had the distinct privilege of having a neighbor who was 104 years old that time in that small little community. She was born, she thinks that she didn't know the exact date, somewhere the first week of June, 1876. 3 weeks before Custer's last stand. So there was I, a 16-year-old, and this woman could have been 1,000 to me at the time, of how distant her memory was. And I stand here today, now I'm talking, of someone who spoke with someone who was alive before that and asked her about what she thought, the things that she'd seen. And I say that again, not as a cliche of not to throw it out there or like it's supposed to be a cheap, like amazing line. That difference between her birth, the story she told me in my life now, has seen immense changes. They will pale in comparison to that same timeline coming. That is simply factual, and the things that are happening in the pace and acceleration of things. Now, during that lifetime, many lives were improved, but during that lifetime, several world wars, pandemics, other things have happened. So again, it's not about the Pollyannish, it's about a recognition of seeing change and embracing it, that it's our ability to have a say in that. It's our ability to look at what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses going forward. So this is what today is about. It's to try and look like, how do we capitalize with the goal, and I think this is agreed upon, whether it's politics, philosophical belief, or whatever. I think the goal is to try and create a world where people can live in peace, they can live in freedom, they can make opportunities to live their lives the best they can, they can live as healthy a lifestyle as possible, all with a sustainability that allows the next generation to do the same or better. So trying to get to those places is going to require some thought, it's going to require some planning, and it's going to have us take an honest look at what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, and what do we have the capacity to change in that. And so I hope the conversations that come out of today address some of these things. And I just briefly wanted to mention, one of the things we came out, one of the goals in this is, and I would like to take an opportunity to thank all of you, the privilege of representing you over the last going on 12 years is an honor of a lifetime. And I've always tried and remind myself that I needed to approach this job, not from an ideological or political perspective. I needed to approach it from that basic perspective of the people I was supposed to represent and do it in the same manner you lived your life. And I think a Southern Minnesota attitude is, it's passionate, it's positive, it's collaborative. At times we can be a little bit, hesitant to come forward and stand out. I'm very pleased that people sat in the front row, which is unusual in many of these things. And but we've got folks that we know who we are, I think. And I think the opportunity for that is to capitalize on those strengths. And one of the things that we came out of these conversations, and we were in Laverne yesterday, and I think it's a big congressional district when you get out to Rock County. And one of the challenges out in Laverne, as many of you know in the Southwest, is a shortage of water, which is ironic enough in the state of Minnesota, which is ironic enough in a place that has 20% of the world's fresh water. And as my 11-year-old son came home from school one time last year, doing that amazing fact that all of us, when we heard it, blew our minds too, is, Dad, do you know there's the exact same amount of water on this planet as there was with dinosaurs? We're drinking the same water they drank. Yes, we know that. That is the fact on that. Well, that reality comes home in a thirsty world. You see stories out of South Africa where they're simply running out of water. Southwest Minnesota is like that. But through engineering and through foresight and through government collaboration and through taxpayer dollars, we built the Lewis and Clark Rural Water Project that diverted water from the Missouri River into Southwest Minnesota. And the reason that's so important is in communities like Adrian, we couldn't even build another house because there was no capacity to look on. And when it comes to businesses that are water intensive, we were stymied. But now we have the water there, and we're protecting it and recycling it. And guess what sprung out in Laverne? If you would have asked 10 years ago that Laverne is staking its claim to be the shrimp capital of the world. We are raising shrimp in Laverne and we are going to displace a very cruel, environmentally unsound, and one that violates human rights that comes out of Southeast Asia and Vietnam that uses child labor and other things to raise shrimp. They are now going to be raised in Southwest Minnesota, creating job opportunities, creating a new protein source, and doing all those things. That's the type of things that can happen when we collaborate together. But we found, when we looked at this, some things we needed to look at. Human capital goes right into this. A labor force. How do we train people? How do we get them there? How do we make sure a state that does very well in education in some areas, but has one of the largest achievement gaps for our citizens of color? That is not just an issue they own, it's an issue all of us own, because we cannot afford in this global economy, we cannot afford in a society to leave anyone behind because of the costs are enormous on the long end. I oftentimes say this is, again, one of those looking at something that is a challenge and is almost tragic that we have to turn into a positive. Is those of you in education know this. It used to be we used the statistic by third grade testing, we could tell with pretty good certainty the graduation rates of those third graders, which kind of shocked you. Now we've gotten to the point that we can tell by kindergarten vocabulary with pretty accurate certainty incarceration rates of what we're going to go. So now you're starting to think of what happens in the criminal justice system, what happens to lost opportunity, what happens to all of those things in a society that it is, you can pretty much assume you're failing if you end up in a situation like some states are finding themselves in, that you're spending more on incarceration than you want higher ed. That's not the balance that you want to get to. So those are the opportunities that this piece gets us, and we're hearing that out there. How can we get people trained up? How can we get this? How do we do new innovative things like Welding Academy in the Fairmont schools at producing welders? I spent time with the sheet metal workers the other day. If you can come out of their apprentice program as a journeyman, a sheet metal worker in the Twin Cities area is making about $105,000 to $115,000 a year, and they're in high demand for the work that they do. It's a noble skill set. It's things that they're doing. Start thinking about that going forward. Assets, foundational assets, infrastructure, transportation, mental health care, housing, and broadband. I don't know how many times. We held a summit down here in 2007 on the housing issues that were affecting us. We are now, at least I think, as an area across this district, we view housing as an infrastructure. There's horizontal and there's vertical infrastructure, and we see it as this is not Section 8 housing or affordable housing. This is housing in general for people who need jobs. And how do we make sure we provide them? Because again, in Fairmont, a wonderful community that people should want to flock to, we were having difficulty attracting elementary school applicants because there's no place for them to live. There's simply no houses in the price range or that are even available to get there. So those are things we need to talk about. And when it comes to broadband, there's no one, I don't believe anymore, sees broadband any differently than they see water, electricity, and basic infrastructure. And again, we've got communities where students have to come in to the local McDonald's to try and get the free Wi-Fi so they can do their homework. Those inequities that are starting to happen cannot happen because they will create not only social inequities, they will create economic inequities. Economic competitiveness, again, we go back to healthcare. I, for one, and I know all of you, I'm sick to the bone of talking about healthcare in a vacuum of health insurance coverage. This is an issue that we need to get to a system where it's about WellCare. It's in everybody's best interest, whether they are Democrat, Republican, Independent, or whatever. It's in the best interest if you're a business owner or you're an employee. All of us know what we really, really want out of our health care. We don't want to get sick. If we do get sick, we want to be able to use that, we want to be able to pay for it, and we want to be back to work as soon as we can. We would like to live as healthy a life as we can, both contributing to our society and quite honestly just living and enjoying our grandkids or whatever else would be there. We need to get to that point, and Minnesota is well positioned to that. We still have some of the highest life expectancies and some of the best outcomes. We've reduced uninsured people to one of the lowest levels in the nation. All of those things are positive. And yet, we have these idiotic discussions and debates that have nothing to do with delivering wellness to people because they're political things. Oh, we got to throw this out and this, we have to do that or whatever. These type of arguments that have gone political, whether they be on healthcare or again, what you're going to see today, pointing out issues that are there are fine, but pointing them out to sow division gets us nowhere. And again, global trends that are leading to changes in living patterns between rural and urban areas certainly shouldn't be a reason, and everybody in this room's heard it, but we've got this urban-rural split in Minnesota between the Twin Cities and greater Minnesota, whatever it might be. Approaching it from that perspective is not only stupid, it's counterproductive. seeing us as a state that has multiple opportunities and levels of economic activity is what makes us strongest. And the first district is no different than that. From urban areas to suburban areas to rural areas to farm producing, energy producing, healthcare facilities, all of those things are part of the infrastructure that we need to build. Community resources, there's some folks here from Lanesboro, I know, one of the early communities to adapt and understand that when it used to be, we can't afford to do some of these things like parks or bike trails. I think the attitude now is we can't afford not to do these things in terms of how they bring people in, how we have livable communities, how we build that in. And the final thing is, and I say this, understanding that I stand right in the middle of this and I know that my house is built from glass, is how do we make government be more responsive and work? How do we make sure this system doesn't become, and there are some real structural things we can do. I tell you this, if I've learned nothing from being in Congress, well, I've learned two things. One is to never say it can't get worse. I have learned that. And secondly, that partisan gerrymandered districting is what's causing most of our problems. That and campaign finance reform would fix it. When you take away the incentive of the moral peril to compromise, you take away any opportunity to move the way this country was designed to move, which is compromise as a virtue, not a vice. And that has been removed from the system. And then you got a situation that by doing so, you did exacerbate this split. There are now less than a handful or so, a dozen or so, urban Republicans left in the country. And there are 10 rural Democrats out of 435 congressional districts. And so when you put the map up on there, it's visually burned into your head that there's these blue islands in the middle of red areas because of that difference. That has been exacerbated on purpose. Some of it's cultural and some of it's differences. We happen to live in one of those areas where it blurs together, whether it's purple, I think that's probably not it. It's kind of red with blue polka dots that you get sometimes that go in there. And that's because of this trend on urban versus rural in the population, because truly it's pretty split. As someone correctly pointed out, they said in all reality is how people identify themselves. The Republican and the Democratic Party are actually smaller in identification than people who find themselves as independent, which tells me, and again, that's not the politics of it, that's how they're viewing the world. So you're going to have a great day here. You're going to have the opportunity to hear some great panelists. You're going to get the opportunity to, I think, celebrate what we already know. The incredible things that are happening there, the incredible leadership that's exhibited in this room. For me, it's simply a pleasure and a privilege to be my one small part of it. But part of this conversation and the data gathering that's happening with our folks from Hamlin that are here and with David's work is to provide a blueprint going forward. Whoever occupies this position that I have had the privilege of having for a short time will be able to start with some data, with some perspectives, and start moving forward so we don't reinvent the wheel. And my contention is when someone said, oh, this is a big, bold agenda, I don't know if there's too much of what you're trying to talk about or too optimistic or whatever. My answer to them, only partly facetiously, was to say, well, we're Minnesotans. We drive on water, for goodness sakes. And those are the types of things that have never been obstacles. But it's not a false bravado. It's a realism based on facts. It's a optimism for the future. It's also a pragmatic nature to this is, if you don't do it, who is going to? If we don't do this and build for our children's future, which I think is an inherent drive in all of us, how will that happen? And if we fail to see the future with a sense of optimism, that's not who we are. That's not who our founders were. That's not what they did when they carved out a life out of a place that could have just been another cold agrarian piece of land. It did not become that. It became the land of Norman Borlaug. It became the land of the Mayo brothers. It became the land of great communities, Winona, Laverne, Worthington, Mankato, that stretch across this district because of each of you. So I thank you for being here. I wish you great curiosity today. I ask you to give us honest feedback on this and to embrace the possibilities that lie in southern Minnesota. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.